The echoes of Blackwood Cabin. The air hung heavy and still as the old pickup truck rumbled down the overgrown dirt track, the last vestiges of late autumn light bleeding from the sky. Mark, a strapping man in his late 20s with a beard he'd been cultivating since college, gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Beside him, Sarah, her usually vibrant eyes clouded with a mix of excitement and unease, clutched a worn map. They had inherited Blackwood Cabin, a remote forgotten property deep within the Appalachians, after Mark's estranged great-aunt Ilara Vance had passed away under mysterious circumstances. Locals in the nearest tiny town, Hallowed Creek, had been unusually tight-lipped, their gazes lingering a moment too long, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes when the cabin was mentioned. "Fair's been empty for decades, son," Old Man Hemlock had grumbled at the general store, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "Best let sleeping dogs lie." But Mark and Sarah, city dwellers tired of the relentless urban grind, saw a chance. For a fresh start, a secluded escape. The cabin itself materialized from the deepening twilight like a skeletal hand reaching out from the gnarled forest. Its windows, dark and vacant, seemed to watch them as they approached. The porch sagged, and the paint peeled like diseased skin. A profound, unnatural silence enveloped the property, broken only by the crunch of their tires on the gravel and the frantic thumping of Sarah's heart. She shivered, pulling her jacket tighter, despite the mild evening. "It's more isolated than I imagined," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the truck's engine. Mark tried to project an air of confidence, but a prickle of unease had begun to crawl up his own spine. He killed the engine, and the ensuing quiet was absolute. Oppressive. Not even crickets dared to chirp. The front door, a heavy slab of rotting wood, creaked open with a groan that echoed like a dying breath, revealing a moor of impenetrable darkness. The air inside was cold, dead, and carried the faint, unsettling scent of dust, decay, and something else, something almost metallic like old blood. Sarah instinctively recoiled, a nervous laugh catching in her throat. "Welcome home, I guess," she managed, though her eyes were wide with apprehension. Whispers from the walls their first night in Blackwood Cabin was a restless one. Every creak of the ancient timbers, every rustle of leaves outside, sounded amplified, malevolent. Sarah swore she heard faint whispers emanating from the walls, indistinct and breathy, like secrets unwillingly shared by the house itself. Mark dismissed it as the creaks and groans of an old structure settling, coupled with their overactive imaginations, but even he couldn't shake the chill that permeated the cabin, a cold that seemed to seep from the very foundation. Days turned into a week. They spent their time trying to make the cabin habitable, cleaning out decades of grime, cobwebs, and forgotten relics. Among the junk, they found a faded, leather-bound journal tucked away in a dusty old trunk in the attic. The handwriting was spidery, belonging to Ilara Vance, Mark's great-aunt. The entries started innocuously enough, detailing her early days in the cabin, but slowly, subtly, the tone shifted. She wrote of the others, shadowy figures she sometimes glimpsed in her peripheral vision, and a constant low hum that vibrated through the floorboards. "They watch," an entry from 1972 read, "always watching. Their hunger grows." Sarah found herself reading it aloud one evening, her voice trembling. What did she mean by "their hunger"? She asked, her eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit living room. A sudden sharp rap echoed from the window, making them both jump. Outside, a branch scraped against the pane, but the sound had been too deliberate, too close. Mark went to investigate, but found nothing. He pulled the curtains shut, a new unease settling over him. Later that night, as they lay in bed, a series of soft, rhythmic thuds began from directly beneath their floorboards, like something heavy being dragged across the dirt basement. It started slowly, then grew louder, more insistent, a heavy, dragging sound that seemed to be moving towards the staircase. "Mark," Sarah whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Do you hear that?" His eyes were wide open in the darkness. "Yeah," he replied, his voice a low growl of fear. "Yeah, I hear it." The thuds stopped directly beneath their bedroom, followed by a profound, chilling silence. Then a single guttural moan seemed to emanate from the floorboards themselves, right under their bed. The basement's secret. The moan was a sound neither of them would ever forget, raw and filled with an ancient, unbearable pain. The next morning, fueled by a terrifying curiosity and an undeniable need for answers, Mark decided they had to investigate the basement. He found the access hatch hidden beneath a threadbare rug in the kitchen. It was heavy, sealed with a rusty, ancient latch. As he pried it open, a blast of cold, damp air assaulted them, carrying with it the metallic scent they'd noticed on their arrival, now much stronger, more sickening. A rudimentary set of wooden steps led down into absolute darkness. Mark, armed with a powerful flashlight, descended first, Sarah clutching his shirt collar from the top step. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a dirt floor, uneven stone, walls and a low ceiling. It was sparsely furnished, a rickety old workbench, some cobweb-laden shelves holding empty jars, and in the very center, a peculiar, crudely constructed wooden cage. It was large, roughly 6 feet by 6 feet, made of thick splintered timbers, almost like an animal trap. Inside the cage, illuminated by Mark's wavering light, was a desiccated, skeletal remains, not fully human, but something disturbingly close. Its limbs were elongated, its skull oddly misshapen with eye sockets far too large. A shriek tore from Sarah's throat, bouncing off the damp walls. "What in God's name is that?" Mark, stunned into silence, could only stare. The journal entries flooded back to him. They watch. Their hunger grows. He turned his flashlight back to the walls, noticing faint, almost imperceptible carvings in the stone. Crude, ancient symbols, intertwined with what looked disturbingly like distorted human figures. Then his light landed on a section near the cage, where the dirt floor looked freshly disturbed. He knelt, pushing away some loose soil, and uncovered a small, tarnished silver locket. He opened it, his heart seizing in his chest. Inside was a miniature portrait of a young woman, her face striking in its resemblance to Elara Vance, Mark's great-aunt, but younger, vibrant. And on the back, etched meticulously, were 3 words: "Don't forget Eleanor." Suddenly a loud thump came from upstairs, followed by the distinct sound of the kitchen floorboards groaning, as if something incredibly heavy had been dropped. Sarah screamed again, her voice raw with terror. "Mark, what was that?" The flashlight beam trembled in his hand. The basement door, which they had left ajar, slowly creaked shut with an agonizing groan, plunging them into near-total darkness, leaving only the weak, flickering beam of his flashlight to pierce the oppressive black. The unseen tenant panic seized them, a primal, suffocating fear. Mark fumbled for the doorknob, pushing against the heavy wood, but it wouldn't budge. It felt as if something immense was pressing against it from the other side. "It's locked!" he gasped, his voice raspy. Sarah was hyperventilating, tears streaming down her face. "What do we do? What do we do?" The basement was no longer just a place of ancient horrors. It was a tomb. The air grew colder, and they could feel an oppressive presence descending upon them, a suffocating weight that pressed in from all sides. Then a low, rasping whisper filled the space, seeming to emanate from the very air around them, surrounding them. It wasn't in English, but the intent was clear, malevolent: hunger. Mark's flashlight began to flicker wildly, dying slowly. In the intermittent flashes, they both caught a glimpse of something moving just beyond the cage where the skeletal remains lay. A shadow, not quite solid, but darker than the surrounding darkness, seemed to ripple and coalesce, its form elongated, impossibly thin. Its head tilted, as if observing them. Sarah's eyes widened in sheer horror, unable to scream again, only a choked gurgle escaping her lips. "Eleanor," the whisper rasped again, closer now. "You shouldn't have forgotten." The words echoed, Elara's journal entry, connecting the forgotten great-aunt to this unspeakable entity. Mark stumbled back, pulling Sarah with him, until their backs hit the cold, damp stone wall. The skeletal remains in the cage seemed to shift, its empty eye sockets fixing on them. The whisper intensified, transforming into a cacophony of voices, a chorus of suffering and ancient malevolence that swirled around them, pressing in. The locket still clutched in Mark's hand grew icy cold. The entity, now a more defined, towering silhouette, stretched its impossibly long arm towards them, its hand ending in razor-sharp claws, just as the flashlight finally died, plunging them into absolute impenetrable darkness. A single agonizing scream ripped through the cabin from above, distinct and chilling. A woman's scream, followed by a heavy, dragging sound, moving rapidly towards the basement door. Then silence, more terrifying than any noise, descended once more. The heavy press against the door from outside seemed to vanish. They heard the distinct click of the latch unlocking. Then the door slowly creaked open, revealing nothing but the darkness of the house above and a faint, almost imperceptible, metallic scent. Mark and Sarah never spoke of what they truly saw that night, only that they abandoned Blackwood cabin and never looked back. The whispers of the unseen tenant and the horrifying truth of Eleanor's fate, forever etched into their minds. The long road home. The desolate stretch of Highway 70 cut through the vast, dark heart of Nevada like a scar, an endless ribbon of asphalt under a sky choked with a million indifferent stars. Emily, a young college student with a penchant for late-night drives, was on her way back to Reno after visiting her parents in rural Utah. Her old Honda Civic, trusty but tired, hummed a monotonous tune as the miles peeled away. It was past 2 a.m., and sleep deprivation was starting to play tricks on her eyes, making the roadside bushes dance and the occasional reflective sign glow with an eerie intensity. She'd been driving for hours, the only company the hushed static of the radio and the dwindling gas in her tank. The last town she'd passed was a blur of neon and shadows, miles back, and the next gas station was still a good 40 minutes away, according to her outdated GPS. A shiver, not entirely from the cold desert air seeping through the vents, traced its way down her spine. The vast emptiness of the landscape was usually calming, but tonight it felt predatory. The darkness pressed in on all sides, a living, breathing entity. Suddenly, a flicker of movement by the side of the road caught her eye. She instinctively slowed down, her heart giving a little lurch. Standing just off the shoulder, silhouetted against the pale glow of her headlights, was a figure. A man, tall and impossibly thin, dressed in a dark, old-fashioned suit, stood absolutely still, his back to her, facing the open desert. He wasn't hitchhiking, his arm wasn't raised. He simply stood there, a static anomaly in the fluid rush of her journey. A chill, colder than before, gripped Emily. Her first instinct was to keep driving, to accelerate past this unsettling tableau. But then, a flicker of humanity, or perhaps a foolish sense of responsibility, tugged at her. He could be stranded in trouble. Nevada desert nights were lethal. She tapped the brakes, slowing to a crawl. As her car passed him, the man slowly, deliberately turned his head. His face was obscured by the shadows cast by the brim of an old fedora, but Emily felt the weight of his stare, an unnerving, palpable intensity that seemed to bore into her very soul. She accelerated, her foot pressing hard on the gas, a sudden surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. The image of the silent, unmoving figure lingered in her rearview mirror, shrinking quickly into the consuming darkness. But as she drove, she couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes, though unseen, had followed her, like a predator tracking its prey. Outlined too. The persistent passenger. Emily tried to rationalize the encounter away. A stranded motorist, nothing more. But the image of the man, so still, so utterly devoid of any normal human reaction, gnawed at her. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white. Minutes later, the gaslight on her dashboard flickered, a warning. Panic began to set in. She had to find a station, and soon. As she rounded a gentle curve, her headlights swept across the side of the road once more. And there he was again. The man in the dark suit, standing in the exact same posture, back to her, facing the desert. He was impossibly far from where she'd last seen him, a distance no human could cover in mere minutes, especially on foot. A choked cry escaped Emily's throat. This wasn't possible. Her mind scrambled for an explanation, a hallucination, sleep deprivation, anything but the terrifying truth her gut was screaming at her. She mashed the accelerator, the Honda's engine straining, the needle on the speedometer climbing higher. Her eyes darted to the rearview mirror. Nothing, just the receding darkness. She told herself it was a trick of the light, a figment of her overtaxed imagination. But the cold dread that had settled in her stomach refused to dissipate. Her hands began to tremble. She reached for her phone, but there was no signal, just the frustrating no service icon. She was utterly alone. As she continued her frantic drive, the thought occurred to her. What if he wasn't trying to get help? What if he was waiting for her? She started to check her rearview mirror more frequently, a growing paranoia seizing her. The gas station sign finally appeared on the horizon, a beacon of hope, its neon glow a welcome splash of color against the oppressive black. Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her, her shoulders slumping slightly. She was almost there. Just as she was about to pull into the station's brightly lit forecourt, a shadow detached itself from the darkened entrance of the abandoned diner next door. The man in the dark suit standing perfectly still, watching her. His head slowly turned, and this time the brim of his fedora lifted just enough for her to catch a glimpse of what lay beneath. Not a face, not flesh, but a void. A swirling, inky blackness where eyes and features should have been. Emily screamed, a raw primal sound that ripped from her throat, but it was swallowed by the sudden, chilling sound of her front passenger door clicking open. Outline 3. The uninvited passenger. Metallic click of the door latch echoed in the confines of the car, chilling Emily to the bone. She slammed on the brakes, the tires squealing, the car skidding sideways for a horrifying moment before coming to an abrupt halt in the deserted gas station lot. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. She didn't dare turn her head, her gaze fixed on the passenger seat, even as her mind screamed for her to look. But she knew. She could feel the sudden, heavy presence beside her, the air in the car growing colder, thicker, suffocating. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of damp earth and something acrid like burnt sugar filled the small space. A low, rasping hiss came from the passenger seat, so close it felt as if it was right next to her ear, raising goosebumps on her arms. "You were going so fast," a voice whispered, dry and brittle, like crumbling leaves. It was not a human voice. It was devoid of emotion, a flat monotone that scraped against her nerves. "But you can't outrun what's already inside." Emily squeezed her eyes shut, tears blurring her vision, her hands still locked on the steering wheel, too paralyzed with fear to move. She could feel a cold, spectral touch on her arm, a pressure that was both insubstantial and terribly real. Her skin crawled, her blood turning to ice. The man in the dark suit was sitting beside her, silent, still, yet radiating an undeniable menace. She could only imagine the void where his face should have been, turning slowly towards her. "The road, it has hunger," the voice continued, barely above a whisper. "And you are a feast." She tried to scream again, but no sound came, her throat constricted by an invisible hand. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to open her door and run into the brightly lit gas station, but her body wouldn't obey. It felt as if she was trapped, pinned by an unseen force, unable to move a single muscle. The touch on her arm tightened, becoming almost painful, the cold seeping into her very bones. She could feel his breath, cold and stale, ghosting against her neck. The terror was absolute, consuming, stripping away all sense of self, leaving only a raw, instinctual animal trapped in a cage. Then the car's interior light, which had been off, flickered to life. In the sudden, harsh glare, Emily managed to steal a quick glance. The passenger seat was empty. No man, no suit, no fedora, just the empty space and the lingering, bone-deep chill. But the faint, acrid scent still permeated the air, and her arm still tingled with an unnatural cold where the touch had been. She was alone, yet she knew, with a certainty that reached into her soul, that she wasn't. The unshakable presence. Emily burst out of her car, scrambling towards the brightly lit convenience store like a frantic animal, her legs wobbly beneath her. The cashier, a tired young man with bored eyes, barely registered her disheveled appearance or her ragged breathing. She fumbled for her wallet, paid for gas, and then, without looking back, filled her tank, her eyes darting nervously around the empty lot. The desert wind whispered secrets through the creaking sign of the abandoned diner, and she swore she could still see the silhouette of the man in the dark suit, melting into the deeper shadows. She drove the rest of the way to Reno in a daze, the radio blaring, her windows down despite the cold, desperate to fill the car with anything but the scent of stale earth and burnt sugar. She told herself it was exhaustion, a severe panic attack, a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation and the eerie isolation of Highway 70. But deep down, she knew it was more. Days turned into weeks. Emily tried to resume her normal life, but the experience had fundamentally altered her. She couldn't drive at night without the image of the man in the dark suit flashing in her mind's eye. The sound of a door clicking, a sudden draft, or a strange scent would send her heart racing. Her friends noticed her withdrawn demeanor, her newfound aversion to isolation, but she couldn't bring herself to explain. Who would believe her? One evening, months later, she was sitting alone in her apartment, the television droning in the background. She felt a familiar chill, a subtle drop in temperature in the room. The scent of damp earth and burnt sugar, faint but unmistakable, wafted through the air. Her eyes darted to the empty armchair across the room. She knew with a horrifying certainty that he was there, not visible but undeniably present. A low, rasping whisper, the same brittle voice she'd heard in the car, brushed against her ear, raising every hair on her body. The road. It follows. You, Emily. She didn't scream, she couldn't. Her blood ran cold as she finally understood. The man wasn't a hitchhiker looking for a ride. He was a collector. And she wasn't just a passenger he picked up. She was the vehicle. He hadn't left her on Highway 70. He had simply changed seats. He was in her apartment, in her car, in her life, a persistent, unseen passenger, a chilling shadow that had permanently attached itself to her. He was the unshakable presence, a silent sentinel, always watching, always waiting. And she knew, with a crushing finality, that she would never truly be alone again. The new house on Willow Creek Lane. The old Victorian on Willow Creek Lane had been a bargain, almost too good to be true. Liam, a meticulous architect with a fondness for historical preservation, and Chloe, a vibrant artist who saw beauty in every chipped paint and creaking floorboard, had fallen in love with its ornate woodwork and sprawling gardens, despite its dilapidated state. It was their dream project, a chance to escape their cramped city apartment and raise their two young children, 5-year-old Lily and 3-year-old Ethan, in a home with character. The previous owner, a reclusive elderly woman named Mrs. Albright, had reportedly passed away in the house a decade prior, leaving the property to decay into disrepair. Locals in the quaint town of Oakhaven spoke of the house in hushed tones, often prefacing their remarks with, "It's a beautiful place, but..." and then trailing off, their eyes holding a peculiar glint of apprehension. Liam dismissed it as small-town gossip, the usual superstitions surrounding an old, unoccupied house. Their first few weeks were a whirlwind of renovation plans and unpacking. The children, initially thrilled by the sheer size of their new home, soon became noticeably subdued. Lily, usually an extroverted chatterbox, started spending more time in her room, talking to herself in whispers. Ethan, who had always been fearless, began clinging to Chloe's leg, his wide, innocent eyes constantly scanning empty corners of rooms. "Mommy, the shadows dance," Lily said one evening at dinner, stirring her pasta with a fork. Chloe chuckled. "It's just the light from the fireplace, sweetie." But Lily shook her head, her gaze fixed on something beyond her mother's shoulder. "No, not just light, something else, they watch." Liam exchanged a worried glance with Chloe but decided to keep the atmosphere light. One afternoon, while Chloe was painting in her studio, she heard Lily giggling loudly from the unused formal dining room. She peeked in, expecting to see Lily playing with a toy. Instead, Lily was sitting alone on the ornate rug, facing an empty corner, her small hands extended as if playing patty cake with an invisible partner. "Don't cheat, Eliza," Lily chided playfully, then giggled again as if responding to a whispered secret. Chloe's blood ran cold. Eliza, that was the name Mrs. Albright's only daughter, who had died tragically in the house as a child, was said to have had. Outline 2. Whispers from the walls. Chloe felt a tremor of unease ripple through her. She dismissed it as coincidence, or perhaps Lily overhearing some local gossip, though they had been careful not to discuss the house's history in front of the children. Yet the name Eliza lingered, an unsettling echo in the cavernous old house. Lily's conversations with Eliza became more frequent and detailed. She spoke of Eliza's cold hands and whispers in the dark, innocent descriptions that chipped away at Chloe's composure. Ethan, meanwhile, grew increasingly withdrawn, his nights plagued by nightmares that left him screaming. He would often point to empty spaces and whimpers. Shadows. Bad shadows. One evening, Chloe walked into the kitchen to find Lily standing on a chair, her small hand reaching up to a high shelf, attempting to retrieve a dusty old porcelain doll that had belonged to Mrs. Albright. It was a beautiful, yet eerie doll, with vacant glass eyes and a faint, almost imperceptible crack across its cheek. "Eliza wants her dolly," Lily explained, her voice soft, almost a mimicry of someone else's. Chloe gently took the doll, a strange chill emanating from its porcelain face. "Sweetie, this doll is very old. Maybe we can find you a new one to play with." But Lily's eyes hardened, taking on a look Chloe had never seen before. "No! Eliza wants her dolly back," she insisted, her tone oddly possessive. Later that week, Liam was in the attic, searching for some old blueprints. He stumbled upon a small, intricately carved wooden chest, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Inside, he found a child's worn locket, a faded ribbon, and a yellowed photograph. The photograph showed Mrs. Albright as a young woman, holding the very same porcelain doll Lily had just found, standing next to a smiling little girl. Etched on the back of the photo in elegant script were the words, "Eliza Albright, my dearest daughter, age 7, taken too soon." Liam felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He descended the stairs, clutching the chest, the reality of what Chloe had told him about Lily's imaginary friend sinking in with a terrifying weight. He found Chloe in the living room, trying to comfort a whimpering Ethan. "The girl in the picture," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Her name was Eliza." Just as he spoke the name, the old porcelain doll, which Chloe had placed carefully on a high shelf, slowly, deliberately, toppled over, landing on the ornate rug with a soft, unsettling thud. Its glass eyes seemed to be staring directly at them. Outline. "There's the basement's secret." The porcelain doll lay on the rug, its vacant eyes fixed on them, a silent, chilling accusation. Liam and Chloe exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated fear. The coincidence was too precise, too terrifying to ignore. They immediately gathered the children, trying to maintain an air of calm they didn't feel. But the house seemed to resist. Their attempts at normalcy. The atmosphere grew heavy, oppressive. The children's behavior escalated dramatically. Lily became more secretive, her whispers to Eliza growing longer, more urgent. She would often stand in the shadows, her eyes glazed over, an unnerving, knowing smile playing on her lips. Ethan's nightmares became vivid, daytime terrors. He began drawing disturbing images, stick figures with distorted faces, shadows with glowing red eyes. "Eliza wants us to play," Lily said one morning, her voice flat, devoid of her usual childish lilt. "She wants us to stay in her room, forever." Chloe felt a fresh wave of horror wash over her. They realized they had to leave. They couldn't stay another night. As they began hastily packing essential items, the house seemed to come alive around them. Doors slammed upstairs, even though all windows were shut. The lights flickered wildly, plunging them into momentary darkness before sputtering back to life. A chilling, melodic hum began to emanate from the walls, growing in intensity, an almost mournful tune that was just off-key enough to be deeply unsettling. From the corner of her eye, Chloe saw Lily standing by the fireplace, the porcelain doll clutched tightly to her chest. Her face was contorted into a strange, adult-like grimace. Her eyes, usually bright with childish curiosity, were now dark, empty pools. "She doesn't want you to leave," Lily whispered. But it wasn't Lily's voice, it was deeper, colder, laced with an ancient malevolence. You promised to stay and play forever. Suddenly the hum intensified, reverberating through the floorboards, shaking the very foundations of the house. A series of loud, frantic bangs erupted from upstairs, like someone desperately trying to break through a locked door. Ethan screamed, clinging to Liam, burying his face in his father's chest. The air grew impossibly cold, and a distinct, sweet, floral scent like wilting lilies filled the room, making Chloe's stomach churn. She knew this was Eliza's scent. And then, the faint outline of a small, shadowy figure, no bigger than a child, began to coalesce in the doorway of the formal, a dining room, its translucent form slowly solidifying, its vacant eyes fixed on Lily, then on them. The unending game. The translucent child figure in the doorway was a silent, terrifying manifestation. Its outline shimmered, almost beckoning Lily, who, still clutching the porcelain doll, took a step towards it, an eerie smile on her face. Liam, breaking free from his paralysis, grabbed Lily, pulling her back forcefully. "No, Lily," he yelled, his voice raw with fear. The house groaned, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to emanate from its very structure. The lights flickered one last time and then died completely, plunging the house into absolute darkness. Only the faint, dying embers in the fireplace cast long, dancing shadows, making every corner seem to twist into grotesque shapes. In the darkness, the sweet, cloying scent of lilies intensified, suffocating them. They could hear Ethan sobbing, uncontrollably, his small body trembling against Liam. Chloe fumbled for her phone, its flashlight beam cutting a weak swathe through the inky blackness. As the light passed over the formal dining room, she caught another glimpse of the figure, now clearer, more defined. It was a young girl, her features gaunt and sorrowful, her eyes black pits, and she wasn't alone. Behind her, other, more amorphous, shadows writhed and pulsed like a silent chorus of ancient grief. A chilling melodic giggle, not Lily's but unmistakably childlike, echoed from the darkness. "Eliza wants to play," the child's voice, devoid of any warmth, whispered, now seeming to come from all around them. "And now, you all will play with me." Liam, pulling both children, stumbled towards the front door, his heart hammering. He wrenched it open, and they burst out into the blessed, cold night air, not even pausing to look back at the dark, menacing silhouette of the house on Willow Creek Lane. They never returned, abandoning everything they owned, their dream project, transformed into a living nightmare. The memory of the spectral child, Eliza, and the chilling promise of her unending game haunted them. Weeks later, safely in a new home miles away, Lily became her old self, bright and bubbly, with no recollection of Eliza. But Chloe and Liam would sometimes catch her humming a strange, mournful tune, one they'd never taught her. And late at night in the quiet of their new house, they sometimes smelled a faint, sickeningly sweet scent of wilting lilies, and heard, ever so faintly, a distant childlike giggle, reminding them that some games, once started, never truly end, and some playmates are not easily left behind. The new clockmaker of Blackwood. The ancient bells of St. Jude's clock tower chimed a deep, resonant tone, echoing across the quaint, fog-draped town of Blackwood. David, a master antique clock restorer in his late 30s, felt a profound sense of purpose as he unlocked the heavy oak door to his new workshop. He'd traded the chaotic bustle of city life for the quiet charm of Blackwood, drawn by its rich history and the chance to restore the town's numerous antique timepieces, many of which were still hand-wound and meticulously maintained. The town itself seemed to exist in its own temporal bubble, its Victorian houses huddled together, their windows like watchful eyes. The central feature was St. Jude's clock tower, its Gothic architecture looming over the town square, its chimes marking the passage of every hour, every quarter hour, with unnerving precision. David quickly settled into his routine, long hours bent over intricate mechanisms, the rhythmic tick-tock of his workshop a soothing counterpoint to his focused work. He relished the solitude, the feeling of complete immersion in his craft. His closest neighbor, Mr. Silas, was the town's previous, now retired clockmaker. He lived in a small, dilapidated cottage just across the town square, shrouded by overgrown wisteria. Mr. Silas was a reclusive man, his face usually obscured by a wide-brimmed fedora, his gaunt frame moving with a slow, deliberate shuffle. He never spoke, only offering a brief, almost imperceptible nod when David passed. David, respecting his privacy, reciprocated. One evening, as David worked late, the clock tower's chimes suddenly ceased. A profound, unsettling silence descended upon Blackwood. Then a faint, rhythmic tapping sound seemed to emanate from the wall directly adjoining Mr. Silas's cottage, almost like a code, but too soft to be truly annoying. He dismissed it as an old house settling, but a vague sense of unease settled in his stomach, a feeling that something about Mr. Silas and the clock tower was profoundly unsettling. The very air in Blackwood felt charged, as if time itself held a secret. Outline 2. Time's peculiarities and Mr. Silas's influence. The sudden cessation of St. Jude's chimes and the faint rhythmic tapping from Mr. Silas's cottage became the first unsettling anomalies that quickly escalated into a pattern of profound disquiet for David. The entire town seemed to follow an unnerving temporal rhythm. Clocks in his workshop, meticulously synchronized, would inexplicably stop, only to resume ticking moments later. People in the town would complain of lost time, brief moments of disorientation where they couldn't account for several minutes or even an hour. The tapping from Mr. Silas's wall became more frequent, always just beyond the threshold of conscious attention, but undeniably there. It would often coincide with the lost time incidents, almost as if marking them. David felt a creeping paranoia, a strange suffocating feeling of being constantly monitored by an unseen temporal force. Mr. Silas's interactions, though minimal, became increasingly unnerving. He'd leave cryptic notes on David's workshop door. Once, a faded drawing of the clock tower, with a large swirling symbol etched at its base. Another time, a newspaper clipping detailing a historical local disappearance, circled in red. Hink. There was no explanation, no signature, but David felt a cold certainty that it was from him. His brief darting glances when they met in the square now held a disturbing, knowing glint, his pale blue eyes seeming to burn with a faint, malevolent red. One morning, David found a small, intricately carved wooden bird, unlike any he'd ever seen, placed carefully on his workshop's windowsill. Its tiny black bead eyes seemed to stare directly into his sanctuary. A chill, colder than the morning air, traced its way down his spine. Later that day, while repairing the clock tower's complex mechanisms, he discovered a small, almost invisible pinhole in the ancient stone wall, directly facing Mr. Silas's cottage. His blood ran cold. He pressed his eye to it, and through the tiny aperture, saw the blurred outline of Mr. Silas sitting perfectly still in his living room, his ear pressed to his own wall, a pair of ancient-looking headphones on his head, listening intently. A fresh wave of horror washed over him. He wasn't just listening. He was actively, meticulously spying on him, orchestrating the temporal anomalies. He had been documenting David's every lost moment. Suddenly, a loud, jarring bump came from directly beneath the clock tower, followed by the distinct sound of something heavy dragging itself across the dirt floor below. Outline 3, the clockmaker's true domain. The jarring bump from beneath the clock tower, coupled with the chilling discovery of Mr. Silas's surveillance and the profound temporal anomalies, shattered David's last vestiges of composure. He was not just a skilled clockmaker, he was a sinister orchestrator of time, a predator masquerading as a reclusive old man. The clock tower, once a symbol of the town's steady rhythm, now felt like a terrifying, active instrument of his will. David snatched his tools, his face pale with raw fear. "What's happening, Mr. Silas?" he yelled, his voice cracking, clutching a heavy wrench. The dragging sound from beneath the tower stopped. A profound, suffocating silence descended upon Blackwood. Then a low, dry chuckle, brittle like crumbling leaves, echoed from inside Mr. Silas's cottage, through the pinhole. "Just winding things up, dear David," the voice whispered, unmistakably Mr. Silas's, but colder, laced with an ancient malevolence. "You left the temporal gears a bit loose. I had to tighten them." David's blood ran cold. The pinhole wasn't just for listening. It was a way for Mr. Silas to exert his chilling influence. He realized with a sickening jolt that the lost time was not random, it was being stolen. He backed away slowly, his eyes darting to the Sahon Square, his only escape. But the voice in the cottage was relentless, weaving a web of terrifying intimacy. Your last appointment, David, with Mrs. Albright's grandfather clock? He lost more than just time, didn't he? He lost his essence. And you are a fine specimen of intricate temporal design. Your fear, it is exquisite. Every detail was accurate, every word a violation. David screamed a raw primal sound and lunged for the clock tower's heavy access door, fumbling desperately with the locks. Just as he managed to unbolt it, a loud, reverberating thwack sounded from inside. Mr. Silas's cottage, followed by a grunt of effort. The door to the clock tower's subterranean mechanism room, which had been slightly ajar, suddenly burst open. Standing in the darkness, illuminated by the faint, sickly green glow emanating from within, was a tall, gaunt figure. Its face was obscured by the shadows cast by a wide-brimmed fedora, but its eyes, glowing with a faint, malevolent red, seemed to fix on David with a predatory intensity. It was wearing a dark, old-fashioned suit, and in its pale, impossibly long hand, it held a small, intricately carved wooden bird. "No need to rush, dear David," the dry voice whispered, now emanating from the figure. "The show's just getting started, and I have all your hours." And then he slowly raised his other hand. In its palm, reflecting the faint green glow, was a meticulously organized collection of antique pocket watches, each one glowing faintly with the same sickly green light, each one a chilling trophy of stolen time. The timeless collection, the sight of the glowing pocket watches heavy with stolen time, delivered a final, crushing blow to David's psyche. Mr. Silas wasn't just a clockmaker, he was a silent, predatory master of temporal theft, a ghost haunting the very existence of Blackwood. David's scream died in his throat, replaced by a choked gasp. Mr. Silas's voice, now undeniably the dry, brittle whisper of the figure, filled his mind. "Every tick, every moment, dear David, all collected, all accounted for, and your essence will be a magnificent addition to my timeless collection." The red eyes burned with chilling triumph. David didn't hesitate. He burst out of the clock tower, screaming, not daring to look back at the looming figure in the doorway. He ran across the town square, past the empty houses, out into the night, not stopping until his lungs burned and his legs gave out. He reached the town limits, collapsing onto the dusty road, babbling his story to the bewildered night patrol officer, who immediately called for backup. The responding officers searched the clock tower and Mr. Silas's cottage. They found nothing amiss. The clock tower's mechanisms were perfectly intact. Mr. Silas was found peacefully asleep in his cottage, his old headphones on his head, a half-finished wooden bird carving on his workbench. The officers, while sympathetic, were left. With no concrete evidence, David never returned to Blackwood. He changed his name, moved to a different city, and lived under a suffocating shroud of constant vigilance, forever haunted by the memory of the glowing watches and Mr. Silas's chilling words. He never touched another clock. Weeks later, in his new anonymous apartment, he received a small unmarked package. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, was a single, intricately carved wooden bird, identical to the one he'd seen in his workshop. And beneath it, a tiny folded note that read, "Your time has been recorded, dear David, a rare piece." And a reminder, "I prefer a proper chime next time. Yours, Mr. S." David stared at the bird, then at the note, his blood turning to ice. The implication was clear. Mr. Silas, or whatever ancient entity he served, was not just a neighbor. He was an unshakable, omnipresent collector of moments, always finding his way to his chosen exhibits. And he knew with a crushing finality that one day he would come for the final chime, the ultimate piece in his chilling collection, for his own stolen time. The whispering woods of Crimson Peak, the dense ancient forest of Whispering Woods, loomed like a watchful, silent giant over the small, secluded town of Crimson Peak. Chloe, a spirited nature photographer in her late 20s, adjusted the worn straps of her camera bag as she and her younger brother, Ethan, a thrill-seeking college student, arrived. They had planned this hiking trip for months, drawn by the allure of Crimson Peak's untouched wilderness and the promise of breathtaking vistas. Ethan, ever adventurous, was particularly eager to explore the deeper, less-traveled trails of Whispering Woods, despite the cautionary whispers of the few locals they encountered. "Don't stray from the marked paths, dears," a local shopkeeper had warned, her eyes wide with an unspoken fear. "The woods, they have their own ways, and they don't like strangers, especially those who wander too far from the trail." Chloe, a pragmatic skeptic, dismissed it as harmless small-town superstition, but the sheer intensity of the woman's gaze lingered. Their rented cabin, rustic and charming, was nestled right at the edge of the forest, its windows offering a panoramic view of the towering trees. As dusk settled on their first evening, painting the sky in fiery hues, Chloe watched Ethan, who was already exploring the immediate tree line, a youthful exuberance in his steps. A profound, unnatural silence hung over the woods, broken only by the distant caw of a crow, sounds that seemed amplified by the stillness. The air, despite the warm evening, felt strangely cold, heavy with the faint, unsettling scent of damp, earth and something acrid like burnt sugar. A cold prickle of unease traced its way down Chloe's spine. The allure of Whispering Woods felt suddenly sinister, its silence hinting at secrets far older and darker than mere local folklore. Crimson Peak was a town that guarded its boundaries and its horrors. Outline 2, Ethan's disappearance and Ranger Miller's evasion. The unsettling quiet of Whispering Woods and the lingering sense of unseen eyes continued to prickle at Chloe's nerves throughout their first day. Ethan, however, was undeterred. He vanished into the dense foliage, eager to find a hidden waterfall he'd read about online. Chloe, initially amused by his youthful enthusiasm, grew increasingly worried as the hours passed. His planned return time came and went. She called his phone, it went straight to voicemail. Panic, cold and sharp, began to grip her. She spent the rest of the afternoon frantically searching the perimeter of the woods, calling his name. Her voice growing hoarse, but only the silent, unyielding trees answered. She reported his disappearance to Ranger Miller, a stoic man with weary eyes who merely shrugged. "Kids go missing in these woods, ma'am. Happens all the time. The woods, they take what they want." His indifference was chilling, almost complicit. Chloe's blood ran cold. She pressed him, demanding a search party, but he simply shook his head. No use, the woods won't give him back. That evening, a small group of local children, their faces unnaturally solemn, appeared at the edge of the woods, carrying baskets, woven from dried leaves. They walked purposefully to a clearing near their cabin, where an ancient gnarled tree stood, its branches heavy with strange, dark-petaled flowers, their scent sickly sweet, almost cloying. The children meticulously placed small offerings at the base of the tree, brightly colored stones, wildflowers, and small, intricately carved wooden birds, all identical, their tiny black bead eyes seeming to stare into the forest. A chill, colder than the night air, traced its way down Chloe's spine. As the children completed their ritual, they chanted softly, their voices a low, tuneless melody. For the woods, for the watcher, for the hunger, we give, we give. Just then, a loud, guttural moan echoed from deep within Whispering Woods. A sound so sudden and heavy it made her jump, shaking the very earth beneath her feet, a horrifying confirmation that the town's superstitions were rooted in a terrifying reality. Outline 3. The town's gift and the watcher's demand, the guttural moan from deep within Whispering Woods, coupled with the children's chilling chant and their strange offerings, shattered any remaining illusion of normalcy for Chloe. Crimson Peak was not just a quiet town, it was a community bound by a horrifying ancient pact, and the Watcher was real, demanding its gruesome tribute. Her blood ran cold. Ethan was not just missing, he was a sacrifice. Driven by a desperate need for answers and a growing primal fear, Chloe approached Ranger Miller, confronting him with the children's ritual and the chilling wooden birds. Ranger Miller's stoic facade finally cracked, revealing a man burdened by generations of unspeakable terror. "It's the pact, Mum," he whispered, his voice hoarse, his eyes darting nervously towards the woods. "For the town's prosperity. For safe passage, the woods, now they take a few. Every 7 years, the children, they are the purest offerings." He then pulled a small, intricately carved wooden bird from his own pocket, identical to the children's offerings. "My son. He was a good boy. He understood the ways." Chloe's blood ran cold. Ranger Miller was complicit. He had lost his own child to this horror. That night, under the cover of a moonless sky, Chloe crept back to the edge of Whispering Woods, her powerful flashlight cutting a weak swathe through the oppressive darkness. The whispers from the woods were louder now, a cacophony of indistinct, sorrowful voices, like a chorus of trapped spirits. The sickly green glow she'd observed from the children's ritual was now clearly visible, emanating from the ancient tree, pulsating rhythmically, like a monstrous heart beating beneath the earth. She peered into the glowing fissure at the tree's base, her flashlight beam piercing the inky blackness below. She saw it. Not roots, but a churning, glowing mass of tendrils and green light, writhing, pulsating. And in the center, floating ethereally, was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, identical to the ones offered by the children. Suddenly, a cold, skeletal hand clamped down on her shoulder. Chloe screamed, a raw, piercing sound that was abruptly cut short. She spun around, her flashlight beam dancing wildly, illuminating Ranger Miller, his face contorted into a grotesque, predatory smile, his eyes glowing with the same malevolent green as the woods. He was no longer a stoic ranger. He was impossibly tall, gaunt, his body radiating an ethereal, ancient power. "You've interrupted the ritual, dear," his dry, brittle voice whispered, layered with 1,000 other voices, ancient and powerful. "The Watcher, it demands its full tribute, and now it demands you." And then the other townspeople emerged. From the shadows, their faces impassive, their eyes reflecting the green glow of the woods, forming a silent, terrifying circle around her. The forest's embrace, the circle of townspeople, their faces impassive, their eyes reflecting the malevolent green glow of Whispering Woods, closed in on Chloe. Ranger Miller, transformed into a towering, gaunt entity, his green eyes burning with triumphant intensity, gripped Chloe's arm with impossible strength. "A fair exchange, dear," Ranger Miller whispered, his voice resonating directly into Chloe's mind, layered with countless others. "Crimson Peak prospers. The harvest of children ensures it. And now you too shall nourish the deep. Your spirit will be eternal." The sickeningly sweet scent of burnt sugar, now mingled with the acrid tang of decay and wet earth, was overpowering, making Chloe's stomach churn. She tried to scream, to struggle, to fight, but her body felt paralyzed, her limbs heavy with an unseen force. The ground beneath them pulsed. The green light from the ancient tree intensified, illuminating the faces of the townspeople, revealing faint, almost imperceptible etchings on their skin, swirling symbols that mirrored the ancient carvings on the tree's bark. They were not merely complicit, they were marked, bound by generations of this horrifying pact. Ranger Miller dragged Chloe to the tree's base, her impossibly long, pale fingers reaching out, not for her throat, but for her temple. Chloe felt a profound, agonizing emptiness, a draining, as if her very essence, her fear, her memories, her love for Ethan, her very life were being siphoned away, absorbed by the swirling vortex of green energy that pulsed where Ranger Miller's face should have been. Her vision blurred, the world twisting into grotesque shapes. The last thing Chloe saw before the darkness consumed her entirely was the terrifying, triumphant burning of Ranger Miller's green eyes and the final chilling glimpse of Ethan's face, contorted in silent agony, his small, intricately carved wooden bird clutched in his hand, floating ethereally within the churning green mass of the tree's fissure, his essence forever bound to the Watcher in the woods. No one ever saw Chloe again. Her car remained parked at the cabin, eventually towed away. The locals, when asked, would simply shrug and say she left quietly, like the others. Crimson Peak remained prosperous, its streets unnervingly quiet. And sometimes late at night, a faint, sickly green glow would emanate from whispering woods, accompanied by the soft, childlike giggles and mournful whispers that echoed from within, a chilling reminder that some towns thrive on sacrifices, and some forests. They are never truly appeased, only temporarily sated, waiting for the next offering, the next lost soul to embrace.